In the ancient world, punishments for criminals were extremely brutal. The ancient Persians believed in justice. They rarely sentenced anyone to death for a first offense, unless it was a serious crime like treason. However, if you were sentenced to death in Persia, you would likely face a long, tortuous, and painful process. Before we delve into the most brutal punishments, let's look at a few examples. Take, for example, the death of a Persian judge called Scaphism. Scaphism was a Persian judge who was caught for taking bribes and making unjust rulings. Unfortunately for Scaphism, he encountered King Cambyses II of Persia, 530 BC, 522 BC, the son of Cyrus the Great. Cambyses II wanted to make an example of Scaphism to warn his successors not to repeat the same mistake. First, Scaphism was arrested and flayed alive. The painting, The Judgment of Cambyses by Gerard David in 1498, vividly depicts the judge's miserable end. In the painting, he is tied to a table, and a team of professional flayers removes his skin while Cambyses II watches. Historians are unsure whether Scaphism was flayed alive or had his throat cut before the ordeal. In any case, the executioners flayed every inch of the judge's skin and turned it into strips of leather. They then sewed these strips together to make a chair. From that point on, anyone appointed to Scaphism's position had to sit on the chair as a reminder of what would happen if they accepted bribes. Then came the punishment of being torn apart by the trees. In ancient Persia, being a thief was not a good thing. In most other societies, especially in modern times, being convicted of theft doesn't even warrant a mandatory prison sentence. Instead, thieves are given lenient, suspended prison sentences or forced to perform community service. Things were a little different in Persia, to say the least. If you were caught stealing, a terrible death awaited you. First, you would be taken to a spot where two trees were close together. Next, the executioners would tie the tops of the two trees as close together as possible. Then, the convict's legs would be tied to the tops of the trees, one leg per tree. Finally, the executioners would cut the cord. One can only imagine the gruesome spectacle as the trees sprang apart at incredible speeds. They would shoot upright, and the victim, still tied to them, would be torn in half by the sheer force. After the execution, witnesses would see half of the victim's body dangling from each tree. So, with these two executions in mind, could there really be anything worse? Now, let's look at the story of a man called Mithridates. Mithridates was a soldier of the ancient Persian Empire, famous for accidentally killing Cyrus the Younger at the Battle of Cunaxa in 401 BCE. Cyrus was the younger brother of Artaxerxes II, the king of Persia, who started a rebellion in an attempt to take the throne. At one point in the battle, Cyrus's army was dominant, but an accident occurred when he tried to attack Artaxerxes II's personal guard. According to Plutarch, Cyrus's crown was knocked down when the young Persian soldier Mithridates, mistaking Cyrus for a common soldier, stabbed him in the head with his javelin, resulting in Cyrus's instant death. Mithridates was unaware that it was Cyrus he had killed and did not realize until later that his actions had triggered serious consequences. Cyrus's death was a huge blow to the rebels, who lost their leader and had to retreat. Mithridates' actions, although not intended for Cyrus, ultimately led to the failure of the rebellion. Later, Mithridates was sentenced to Scaphism, an extremely cruel punishment for kill-stealing. Scaphism, also known as the boats, was one of the most terrifying forms of execution in ancient Persia, ordered only when the king harbored extreme hatred for someone. When Plutarch first mentioned Scaphism, he described the execution of Mithridates. The king decreed that Mithridates should be put to death in boats, which execution is after the following manner. Taking two boats, framed exactly to fit and answer each other, they lay down in one of them the malefactor that suffers upon his back. Then, covering it with the other, and so setting them together that the head, hands, and feet of him are left outside and the rest of his body lies shut up within. They offer him food, and if he refuse to eat it, they force him to do it by pricking his eyes. Then, after he has eaten, they drench him with a mixture of milk and honey, pouring it not only into his mouth, but all over his face. They then keep his face continually turned towards the sun, and it becomes completely covered up and hidden by the multitude of flies that settle on it. And as within the boats he does what those that eat and drink must needs do, Creeping things and vermin spring out of the corruption and rottenness of the excrement, and these entering into the bowels of him, his body is consumed. When the man is manifestly dead, the uppermost boat being taken off, they find his flesh devoured, and swarms of such noisome creatures preying upon and, as it were, growing to his inwards. In this way Mithridates, after suffering for 17 days, at last expired. Incidentally, Native Americans used a similar form of torture, but they did not force-feed their victims. As a result, the captured individual usually died from starvation within a few days. There's actually quite the debate about Scaphism on the WikiTalk page, with some editors questioning the veracity of Plutarch and asking for other sources. Plutarch did indeed write that account of Scaphism, but some historians believe he may have done so to demonize the Persians and make his own culture look better. We will never know exactly what happened to Mithridates, but right now, that's the prevailing story. Perhaps he was the only man ever to get the full dose of Scaphism, or maybe old Plutarch was an ancient publisher of fake news. So, did we find the worst punishment of all time?